Hello again, and welcome to the Quantum Navigation Series. It's September 11th, and apparently it's time for another quantum navigation session. We're going to explore in this session the theme asymmetrical and disproportionate reaction. Asymmetrical and disproportionate reactions. Now, this is really important when we look at crossing the quantum bridge. Now, if you remember back from August 16th, where I was talking about crossing the quantum bridge, as you cross the quantum bridge, the invitation to cross the quantum bridge, you get it when you're inside of the quantum, and it shows you your next challenge or next opportunity or next vocation. And as you volunteer to step out into the unknown, and crossing the quantum bridge is very much like stepping out into the unknown, because you don't know if you're going to be supported, and you don't know if you're going to have all of what you need in order to meet the unknown. And so it's at that time that you know, all your unfinished, incomplete processing of shadow comes out of the closet, and it acts as baggage. And so we get this opportunity to see those things. Now, in that episode, that last August 16th, 2020 episode, I was talking about how as you cross the quantum bridge, it's so important to see what shakes your hornet's nest and gets your hornets to swarm. And so, if you remember in there, I was talking about how the quantum asked me, so what, after you've experienced going through the challenges, and remember I talked about the challenge I had was creating this room and not knowing if I could do it because I hadn't done anything like this for 35 years or so, 40 years. So anyway, at the completion of all that, remember you go through the cycle of being so full, so rejuvenated, and having so much. First part is very enthusiastic, and then, you know, as you get tired, as time goes on, and you've been meeting challenge after challenge after challenge after challenge, and then the whole circumstance becomes different. So at the end of it all, after the empowerment comes, the quantum was asking, what did you learn? And I shared in that, you know, all the things, all the amazing things that I learned, and including that sometimes when facing unusual circumstances, challenges, and so on, and you're at the end of your rope, sometimes it takes sacred rage, and sacred rage is different from your normal expression of rage, which is generally speaking unconscious, because unconscious rage is usually projective, meaning they did this to me, I'm being the victim. But in conscious rage, it's pulling your entropy and your resistance, and you're finding all of your characteristics, capability, ingenuity from that which is latent inside of you. You've got to pull it out of you. So sometimes Spirit challenges us with great obstacles in order to pull us out of our entropy, pull us out of our resistance, and come up with a solution to take care of the challenge that we meet. So basically, Spirit is using the challenge in order for us to identify our capacity. Okay, so stepping out on that bridge, that was one thing, it taught me that. And then another thing that, you know, it asked was, what gets your hornet's nest to shake and swarm. And I replied, that has to be disrespect. And that disrespect can come in many different forms, but as I explained in that, without having to go back into all of that, but basically speaking, you're the only one that knows how much investment and self-sacrifice you put into, and creativity that you put into resolving all the situations that you've had. So you're the only one that can really appreciate what you've done in accomplishing whatever circumstance. And they showed me that with all the imperfections that you come across, you're like a silent carpenter. I use that expression, a silent carpenter, because the carpenter can't complain to the architect or the duct worker or the electrical worker and the concrete worker and so on. Because they have their own investments that they've made, and so you're going to be met with a whole lot of resistance in order to communicate your true concern. You're basically going to get the dragon's breath, and if that's what you need to do, okay, that's part of the experience of the empowerment of trying to communicate the challenges that you face. So, at any rate, usually the carpenter is left with having to deal with all of the imperfections in the different arts. And so in that case, it's only left up to the carpenter to come up with the resolution and make perfect from imperfect means. Okay, now this is really important because it really highlights the fact that you, each of us, are the silent carpenter in our imperfect set of challenges that get dished to us. And so it's up to us to be the magician and the alchemist to make the best of it, make perfect from imperfect means. And so that was another thing that was learned. And so, the challenge is, as challenging as it may be, as arduous as it may be, pulls out of you that finesse, right? That how to make divine out of seemingly undivine materials or undivine circumstances and stuff. So, at any rate, and the quantum also communicated with me that as far as the disrespect, if it is that no one stood beside you and walked through all the challenges with you and knows how much self-sacrifice, ingenuity, resourcefulness that you went through under what trying circumstances, enormous heat and absolute fatigue, and still you got the job done. Who's going to notice that? Who's going to appropriately see all the investment that you made? No one. No one can. And so the quantum was communicating to me that in that case, you're the only one that can see how much you've invested in any given circumstances. So how can you take any disrespect? If you're looking for somebody on the outside to respect what you did, they have to walk a mile in your shoes, so to speak. And that's not usually the case. So if you valued how much ingenuity under the most trying of circumstances you use, how much magic you use to pull all these things together, then if you're honoring yourself for them, then how can anybody disrespect you? They can't. because they haven't walked, they haven't been through that circumstance. So that was really important, and that's important when you're crossing that bridge. Okay, so crossing that bridge is the important element here, and we're going to get into that in more in depth, because as I said in the last QN session, when you're walking across that bridge, the quantum bridge into the unknown, and open the door into the challenge that's been given to you. The challenge is appropriate. It gives you all of the conditions that are appropriate for you to fulfill your own empowerment. Okay? So, going across that bridge is about facing challenges, not just from the intellectual or the ideological or the mental, but also the emotional and the physical. And then it sends combinations of them, and then it challenges you with hitting you with all of them all at once. Okay, so it's really important then that element there that the quantum communicated about the shaking of the hornet's nest and getting your hornets to swarm. Because if you don't have control, if you don't grok all of the circumstantial triggers that go with that, then you fail to empower yourself, and then you seek unconscious retribution as a victim for the circumstances that you meet crossing that bridge, the unknown challenges and circumstances. You put them into polarized dynamics, and it leads to that. So one other element that they were showing, which is what we're the theme of today's material, is the asymmetrical and disproportionate reactions. So let's take a moment then and look at the asymmetrical and disproportionate reaction. So a reaction is different from a response. Response comes from empowerment and consciousness. And reaction is a trigger where it elicits a reaction out of you from an unconscious state, a victimized state. So it usually amounts to rebellion, a charge of rebellion, because it hasn't been worked out, it hasn't been seen through. So let me give you an example of a conscious reaction and a normal reaction. Let's just say little Ronnie is learning to ride his two-wheel bicycle, right? And it's the first time that he's ready to take the training wheels off. And invariably we know what's going to happen in this case. Ronnie's going to take a fall. Ronnie's going to injure himself. And so it's going to be frightening. and it's going to hurt. And so in that case, when Ronnie falls and hurts himself, what does Ronnie do? Typical thing is Ronnie goes and looks for an adult to provide some reassurance, little nurturing, and support. So that's in the normal case. Maybe a little kiss on the boo-boo there, and Ronnie's ready to go again. Now, asymmetrical and disproportionate reaction would be if, let's say, Ronnie took that fall, hurt himself, goes and looks for the support, nurturing, and reassurance, which is the normal state, and finds the parent And instead of the parent providing the support, nurturing, and reassurance, the parent gets mad and responds in a reaction and tells little Ronnie, you shouldn't have done that, you should have, so on and so forth, you know, right in your own circumstance there. So that's asymmetrical and disproportionate reaction. So asymmetrical and disproportionate reaction is really important to understand, because when you look at that type of reaction, was it Ronnie? No. Something else was going on in the parent. However, what is the normal case when one faces asymmetrical and disproportionate reaction? Usually, internally, we hit the rewind and replay on the memory tapes and we try to figure out, what did I do wrong? How did I cause this such a bad reaction? It must have been my fault. So you rewind and replay until you selectively find some type of psychological and emotional point where you find fault with what you did. Okay, so here psychologically, if we've created a fault, we marry it with the appropriate emotional response to that fault. Pain, shame, blame, fear, guilt, grief, all comes together inside of that psychology. It was all me. I shouldn't have been whatever. But it's all untrue. As you can see, the little child normally would fall. But rewinding and replay to make a story in order to fit the asymmetrical, disproportionate reaction that the parent had towards the child then makes a psychological imprint and an emotional equivalent to bind it, and that thing just keeps going round and round. The story keeps filtering and playing out round and round and round. So it builds over time, and we create these emotional and psychological triggers that are from frames that came from asymmetrical and disproportionate reactions. Now, when I was just finished with the construction of all of this, and you know, as I shared inside of that last video, I started having experiences of in the quantum. You know how consciousness, as I've said many times in these QN sessions, consciousness has quantum characteristics to it, and so it's really important to understand some basic quantum perspectives, quantum understandings. And so one of those is fractal and holographic, and also I've used superposition and entanglement. So in the experience with the quantum, they gave me a fractal experience. I was deep inside of the quantum. They said, okay, now that you understand crossing that bridge, some people call it the rainbow bridge, whatever, it's the quantum bridge, and you're in that state, the quantum state, and the unknown and unfamiliar. So when you're on that bridge, one of the things they were showing me is they gave me this vision. They brought straight to my face this experience of mirrors within. Remember in the fractals, a good metaphor for the fractalization of consciousness is in the example that you see of putting a mirror in such a way that you see a mirror within a mirror within a mirror. They gave me this experience of the framework there. And they were, instead of each of these frames being a mirror, they gave me incidents of each trauma where I had asymmetrical and disproportionate reaction, and I made a story about it. So, just recently, I had some teeth work done. So here's another example of it, of the asymmetrical disproportionate reaction. So conscious reaction is when you're aware of all of these elements, how you react on all of these different levels versus how you respond. When you're aware, you respond. So response is more of a compassionate understanding and appreciation. And so it all comes back to self then. So you disentangle from victimization, right? Whereas in victimization, you keep projecting, keep projecting, keep projecting. And the wound on all the fractals has all of these woundedness and revisits in so many different stories and as triggers as they come up in the reality around you until you can disassemble them. Because remember, it's all coming from the singularity. The singularity, your greater consciousness, already knows what you're entangled in and wants to return things to disentangled states so that you return to superposition, right? So I went just out of the blue. I was flossing my teeth, right? And when I flossed one of my molars up on the right side, one of the back molars, I had a filling on it, and the filling came loose. And so when I bit down on it, the filling went back in. I was like, well, I got to go to the dentist in order to get it done. So when I went to the dentist, of course, they take X-rays, and they then they can determine what exactly needs to take place, because I can see all of the damage that may be present. In this case, the molar next to it is an old, what do you call it, root canal with a crown on it, okay? It's been there 20-something years or so. Anyway, when I went and I had the X-ray done, the X-ray exhibited that the foundation on the old crown and root canal had wore away. It lasted 20-something years, and so that's really it. It had normal wear on it. Okay, so that needed rebuilding. Okay, that's not a problem. The one next to it, the one where the filling came out and slid back in, underneath it, where the filling was, because the filling was on the face of the molar that was facing the one that had the crown on it and root canal. So underneath where the filling was, apparently, as you get older, and I hate to admit it, I'm getting older, but as you get older, some of that bone gets brittle over time, and so underneath where the filling was fractured. And so they showed me, and they said, we can't believe you're not in pain. And I said, yeah, I can't believe I'm not in pain. So it was very obvious what it is. So anyway, they needed to do something on it right away. And so I go back home, and I didn't ask to have a copy of the X-ray, so I could explain to my friend about this. And So I got home, and I can be a pretty good drawer. So I was drawing it when she asked how did it go, what was the result, and so I tried to draw it out so you can see exactly everything that's going on there, right? And oftentimes when you see clearly, then there is no emotion that's coming out of fear or of the unknown, or because you have clarity. So inside that clarity, that's what I was trying to do, is provide just absolute clarity so that you can minimize. You can see how urgent it is. It tells you so many things instead of leaving things back in the back of your mind, right? So anyway, I start relaying. I'm drawing it out in detail. And all of a sudden, I get asymmetrical and disproportionate reactions. And so I decided, okay, let's let this die down, because this is asymmetrical and disproportionate. This is little Ronnie riding his bicycle. He fell and had a boo-boo. Except, in this case, wasn't really looking for nurturing and reassurance and and support. I was just trying to convey. But anyway, asymmetrical and disproportionate reaction comes up. So I decided, okay, let's let this die down. Give it a little bit, maybe half an hour or so, and then we'll reapproach it. So anyway, after I waited a little bit of time, then I came back and I go, hey, did you notice how when I was drawing all these things out, it created some kind of reaction in you, and it was and I explained asymmetrical and disproportionate reaction. And so it hit on sensitivities along, of course, the financial, and there's many. I think I talked about in some of these. Sometimes, whether I did or not, I can't remember for sure if I did. But sometimes when we have too many subroutines open on the computer, everything starts locking up, and our emotions change because we're balancing too many. We got too many. we're juggling too many plates, spinning too many plates in the air, and your whole demeanor changes because your reality is now all these open subroutines. So every time you open up a new subroutine in the computer program, it pulls you out of center, right? It pulls you out of that quantum state of being conscious and detached, but ready to act if action is needed. But if you have too many subroutines open, you really believe you get pulled in, let's say. You get pulled into all the subroutines you have open. So she just said to me, yeah, I had too many subroutines open. And that's consciousness. That's responding instead of reacting. Now, yes, there was reaction because for a moment there, for a while there, too many subroutines were open and it was causing too many gyrations, right? So in that case, then there was another element here, and I knew of, and that's that sometimes in our past we have traumas from another life or something. And in this case, I knew of a past life where she had been traumatized, and it had to do with torture from dental. And so that was also thrown into the element. So I'm relaying these things because as you can see, the window. This is seeing to the root. And in this case, yes, it was the root of my tooth, but in seeing to the root, to be able to see asymmetrical disproportionate reaction leaves you in a centered state, so you can have a lot more compassion for what reactions are going on. So because of that situation, you know, when I went into the quantum, they opened up all these different frames, frame upon frame. And they said, this is what you're here in this lifetime to do, is to disentangle yourself from the assortment of stories, incidents, traumas that you have, where asymmetrical and disproportionate reaction has arisen, and you created, you remember the rewind replay, until you find a way to selectively choose the psychology and the emotionality to make yourself wrong, even though you were innocent in that state. Like the little child falling off the bike, and the parents are mad at you because of that, and then you try to make a story and make an emotion about how you're the worst thing, or you're the fault, or you find some way to sabotage, self-sabotage your innocence. And so to disentangle from this is to end your victimization, right? To see this clearly then destimulates the situation. So just like getting the hornet's nest shook and swarm, you have to have that self-respect, the self-love of all of the investments and self-sacrifices and inventiveness and creativity that you used in any given situation. So as a little child, you know, how can I reward myself? I wiped out the reward, right? And made myself forever, until this moment of consciousness, I make myself forever the problem. And that's a huge factor when we look at, you know, when the quantum was telling me, this is what you're here to do now as you cross this bridge into the quantum. There's a lot of incidences, fractals, that you've experienced in your life where you've rewound and replayed until you made yourself such at fault, such a villain, or such a victim of that circumstance. And so to see it clearly is to disentangle and re-empower yourself. All right, so one of the, I've got so many stories. I mean, they started showing me point after point, and you know, I've done a lot of you know, personal work on looking at the depths of these issues. As an example, give me just a second here. Okay, here it is. So this graphic did quite a number of years ago, and it's important because it shows the because it shows the roots of unconsciousness. And if you've watched these this series, Quantum Navigation, you'll recognize this graphic because I used it early on. And I need to refresh because when when we're on that bridge, the bridge into the quantum, we're going to come across the 7 roots of unconsciousness. And the 7 roots of unconsciousness, they they arise at the moment we go unconscious. So the moment we go unconscious, we experience abandonment and betrayal. And from abandonment and betrayal, then we have rage, because the betrayal. And then we realize that we feel guilty that we can't have rage against the Creator, so we stuff it in ourselves, and we feel guiltiness, and guiltiness lines all the other roots. So powerlessness, worthlessness, neediness, helplessness, hopelessness, and finally nothingness. The ego hates nothing, hates to be nothing. So nothingness, being nothingness, is synonymous in the dualities to everything. Nothing, only in nothingness. When you give up being something, then you become everything. So in this graphic, when you go across the bridge, the 7 roots of a consciousness are parts of the shadow that we face. So we quickly come across powerlessness, worthlessness, neediness, helpless, hopeless, and nothingness. Now, they give us experience. Your quantum navigator gives you experiences in different ones of these so that you find your empowerment facing these 7 roots of unconsciousness. So as you face the 7 roots of unconsciousness one at a time, then at some point it starts throwing you mixes of them, 1 or 2 together, or then as you're crossing the bridge, they may, at one point, when you're ready, they throw all of them at you. And this is an important factor to realize, have a good grasp of the 7 roots of unconsciousness, and have a good working relationship with these aspects of our shadow. Now, they informed me that, yeah, you worked on these and you did great with those. Now you can apply them to the asymmetrical and disproportionate reactions in each of those frames that we're showing you. And so on that bridge, having the familiarization with how empowerment works, with not running from, the sense of abandonment and betrayal. When we went unconscious, the experience is that, spirit abandoned us. And then we had to go, find externally all our missing pieces. And we went through such experiences that traumatized us in the meantime. But it's those traumas that eventually work towards awakening us and empowering us. So the shadow work was essential. The work that you did in your earlier work was great. Now you can apply them systemically towards each of those frames that we had. Now, Okay, another one of those stories of the fractal mirror within a mirror, asymmetrical disproportionate reactions, comes from my past, and one that they showed me was, and I've shared this before in one of these evening sessions back when I injured my S2 and S3 of the sacrum and the lumbar 4. But back when I was in the early 80s, when I was married and I had my son, my wife at the time, she worked in a bar, and I was working for a bigger corporation at that time. So we still needed a little bit of supplementation in our finances and stuff. So she worked nights and I worked during the day. So I would take care of my son during the days, and I would take my son to all these adventures, to all kinds of different power spots in nature and so on. And so anybody who has had a child knows how much love there is between the child and the parents. And so anyway, after about a year, just out of the blue, my wife at the time wanted a divorce. She didn't want to talk about it. She just wanted a divorce. And you know, I was, of course, stunned by this and wanted to do some type of counseling and all this. So I was trying every way possible, but she was no, and very unresponsive. So there was nothing that I tried that would work. So anyway, during that year, I went through enormous amount of well, let's just say I went through a whole lot of framing, rewind, replay, and trying to find out what I did wrong. So I made all kinds of different stories about what I must have done, or what, because there was no communication. I didn't know. And so let's say after a year went on, finally, we had joint custody, so I was bringing my son back one night, and my ex-wife at the time, on this one occasion, she was really open, receptive, and really wanted to communicate. And so as we put our son to bed, eventually conversation got around to, so what was all that about? Why did you take that course? What happened? What was wrong? And she confided to me that one of the waitresses in the bar convinced her that I didn't love my son. And so you can see the asymmetrical disproportionate reaction, and as I described before, the rewind, replay, trying to find some sort of reasoning about what I must have done to cause all of this. It got, as I went through so many different scenarios, I created all these different scenarios about how bad I was. It got to the point where, as you can imagine, that not knowing what happened, I must, I even developed a belief system that I must have been so bad karmically in so many different lifetimes that this was being rendered upon me to make amends for something that, and until I did all this deep shadow work, which resulted in, finding out the roots of unconsciousness, as they said to me, you did really good with all of this. The inside of the quantum navigator communicated. You did really good on this, but this is laying the groundwork, laying the foundation, so that you can begin to disentangle yourself from frameworks and find your innocence once again from the perspective of asymmetrical disproportionate reaction. So how many lines, I talked about this before, but inside of our lives, we get into certain conditions and challenges where it seems like, just like opening different programs on a computer, when you open too many different programs, too many subroutines are being opened, the whole system starts to bog down a bit, and you get so entranced, engaged, inside of all these different, managing all these different subroutines, all these different programs, and so it causes you to move out of your center, move out of perspective, and get really involved inside of the dynamics of whatever subroutine or program that you're open, and you're managing, you're juggling and managing so many different items that cause stress and concern and so on. So I had so many different subroutines open, trying to figure out what was going on in that scenario. So I was making my, rewind weed play until you find what fits, what feels right. So you create the story and the emotion to go with it. And in this case, the lower levels, pain, shame, blame, fear, guilt, grief, and anger, they are surface levels before you find the roots of unconsciousness. And so as I, working through those elements, and I did a lot of work on this, I said, well, now you're at the point where you can find your innocence. So I'm not saying everything I did was perfect. I'm not pointing to that. I'm pointing out how were you innocent and made yourself more guilty than you were, or you've exaggerated the scenario so that it became a major event in your life. And now, understanding asymmetrical and disproportionate reaction, how many subroutines were open inside of your wife's, in this case my wife, at the time, my wife's reality, and how many, like the tooth scenario, what brought up instances in my friend's life that brought out some past life material, past life incidents, where she was being tortured dentally. There's so many different scenarios like that arise inside of somebody else's reality, in this my friend's life, that I stimulated, that had nothing to do with me, right? So inside of that frame, then, you can see their innocence and your innocence coinciding, but the distraction and distortion by too many subroutines that are open, and the engagement of additional past life triggers coming forward just because of who you are and because of the proximity near common incidents or issues of the past that have to do with abandonment, betrayal, guiltiness, powerlessness, worthlessness, neediness, helplessness, hopelessness, and finally nothingness. So having a clear view. And you only get that clear view, it's not intellectual at all. Experientially, you have to go back into the fire, so to speak, the fugue, the dark night of the soul, the crucible of experiencing the memory, the incident, in such emotional nakedness that you embrace not just the intellectual, the psychological, and the emotional all at once to ford through the chaos of the dissociation, the splitting, and the projections. So when you stand naked and clear, as we've gained experience facing the shadow on the levels of pain, shame, blame, fear, guilt, grief, and so on, the surface levels, exposing the roots of unconsciousness, then you get to see the true innocence that came into the situation. Your partner is just as innocent, because how many subroutines do they have open, and how many past life incidences are coming forward that just being close, the issue, brings back the stimuli of all those incidences that have taken place so deep in the past that we've created these different stories and attached so much negative emotion to them to complete a whole psychological and emotional repeating drama in our life. So this is where they were telling me that each of these frames you can now disentangle from, and you can liberate out of those frameworks that keep you locked into the linearity, the entanglements of these past circumstances. So I've got a lot of past frames like this, like we all do. And I could go on with so many different stories, but that would help illustrate. But I think you're getting the point here, is that each of us, when we moved into unconsciousness, we were left with trying to figure out these awesome, overwhelming challenges, issues, dramas, and traumas by the only one who could help us, which was you at the time. You couldn't frame it in any other way. And so now, to come back and see clearly the asymmetrical and disproportionate reaction and the innocence that goes with that, this is really essential. You know, we've been talking about when you cross the quantum bridge, open the door into the new invitation of the new reality that the quantum is asking all of us to journey into. Number one, they wanted us to be really cognizant of what shakes your hornet's nest and gets your hornets to swarm. And in the, as I talked about earlier, it had been about learning self-appreciation, self-love, and self-realization. And so when you're on that bridge, nobody knows what you sacrificed in the moment, trying to balance and keep whole all the elements that you were attempting to balance in your reality and in yourself, in your consciousness, in your emotional body, so that you can integrate the lesson, see clearly the lesson. So I talked about the silent carpenter, how the silent carpenter has to make a construction as perfect as possible with imperfect materials. And that many of the different arts, although let's say the engineer or the individual, the artist in these different arts did the best they can with what they had and tried to do it as perfect as possible, but it's not perfect for maybe your needs, maybe the conditions that you're facing. So you have to be the silent carpenter, the silent alchemist, silent magician. And so crossing the bridge involves seeing your self-worth to such a degree that you own it, you validate all your investment of your capacity, your intelligence, your genius, your creativity, your time and effort that you placed into something, not relying on somebody else, somebody external to give you back that validation and acknowledgement of all the self-sacrifice, all the creativity, all the ingenuity that you placed into it. So when that happens, then no external individual can really disrespect you. So that is an empowerment on your own and gives you the gravitas to hold the hornet's nest so centered and balanced then that it doesn't come out unconsciously as unconscious retribution. Somebody needs to pay for what I'm going through or the disrespect that I'm facing. And you can apply this in so many different ways. Am I not giving my best because I'm not getting validated for what I'm doing? And it all goes back to the self-respect, the self-appreciation, the self-love, and the self-realization. Once that is embraced, then nobody can really disrespect you. So that was one element of empowerment that's needed as you cross that bridge. And so we're going to go, and I've been just describing another element that is absolutely essential as you're crossing the bridge into the unknown, into the new reality, into the new paradigm. We're moving out of the time lag in space and time before what your singularity, what your belief system has you repeat until you disentangle it, right? So that time lag is decreasing, so we're becoming more efficient and more conscious and more creative, so the manifestation is happening even quicker for us to see our own entanglements. And so one of the other elements that they were showing as you're crossing the quantum bridge is the essential element of understanding asymmetrical and disproportionate reactions. If you can see that and have compassion for that, when you look at everyone in your reality, when you look at everything that's going on in the world, in the history, we've been slowly advancing to the point of self-respect, self-love, self-empowerment, so that we can have the compassionate understanding and clear seeing of this issue of asymmetrical and disproportionate reaction, so it doesn't turn into unconscious retribution and having our hornet's nest shaken by the actions of somebody else, by the belief systems of somebody else, by the apparent paths of other individuals, you have such clarity and understanding, and you're embracing, especially that asymmetrical, disproportionate reaction. We all have it. And so as we hold and embrace that, now through consciousness, we can begin that process. As I showed earlier inside of the graphics about how we're crossing so many different boundaries of the landscape. And the landscape has to do with, the 4 states of matter, which is solid, liquid, gaseous, plasma, but we know there's more than that. So it's solid, liquid, gaseous, astral, etheric, astral plasma, etheric, voidness, and consciousness. So all of that dynamism, all of that, all the structures of the housings to enable such linearity and separation consciousness to exist, is now going through a dynamic change. And so that's affecting us, and it requires us to be, like I showed in the last video, sitting back in the audience, and the audience in this case is in the observer. So as you sit in the observer station, knowing what you are and having experience of opening that part of your being to be the observer as well as the character with source in between the proton and neutron, the 2 different aspects of the center of our core of our being, the center of our heart, then we can allow all the set changes in the play, in the theater to take place, and we're not being drawn into the dynamics and the triggers. We're moving back into the center of self-appreciation, self-love, and self-realization, that we can allow the set to change and go through the dynamics that it is in all the states. And it is going through many different dynamic states. Like I talked about the 2 oceans, the 2 boundaries of the oceans coming together, and they're in constant roiling motion. That's what each of these layers and levels are taking the place. But we need that conscious understanding of asymmetrical, disproportionate reaction to help us maintain the centeredness and peace, so that compassionate understanding and appreciation can help us stay navigating the changes while stewarding all the dissociations, all the splits, fractures, and whatever dynamics they're in, to come towards the lighthouse, which is that clear consciousness of the quantum that you're holding as you navigate all of this. So there's one more aspect that's really important to look at, and we're going to get into that in just a second. So give me a second to change the graphics here. Okay, I found the graphic. So there's another element that I need to talk about, crossing the quantum bridge. So this next element I've spoke of already, the singularity. The singularity exists inside of the core of each and every one of our hearts. The singularity can be found at the center of a black hole. So this is a representation of a black hole, okay? And crossing the quantum bridge, we're going to face some unusual forces, dynamics internally. So, a singularity has, of course, two sections. One is like the white hole and the black hole. Well, at the singularity, which is the point in the middle between the black hole and the white hole, the black hole then draws everything into it. It's inescapable as you pass the event horizon. And it starts to enact forces. We've been in the 3D for quite a while. And so there is a mirror of what occurs in a black hole. There's a mirror effect that happens at the core of our heart and our personal singularity. And that personal singularity is responsible for creating the forces that are kind of like that black hole. You may acknowledge them. You may have experienced them as the dark night of the soul, the shaman's death. If you've followed these videos, I've used the term the fugue. And the fugue acts as if it seems that you're feeling like you're in the dark and you no longer have ground underneath you. It feels like you're floating. And in that dark, it feels isolated, separated, cold, contracted. And you don't have any control over that experience. You also begin to experience not having any nav points. And this may take place for an hour, a day, a week, a month, maybe a couple of months. And then it may disappear for a while and everything feels normal and nice and convenient, and you feel your nav points are back and everything feels ordinary. And then here it comes again, it repeats. And as you go through the fugue, again, no ground, no navigational points, you don't know which direction to go, feels like you don't know which way is up. And all the while inside of this, you feel separated, isolated, contracted, and all the shadow issues start coming up. These are all our missing pieces, all our incompletely processed shadow issues come up at this time. And so we during the fugue, which is, going into the dark, the deepest dark, this is where our baggage comes forward. Not having a direction, not knowing when you're going to get out. All you know and feel is, how do I get out of here? How do I escape this? Until you've made a lot of journeys in this, you find the only way to go out is to go in, to go deeper into it, to go through it. And so it brings up a cauldron, a kind of crucible, burning sensations, which are bringing one issue after another that has yet to be processed, yet to be dealt with. So as you go through this process, it's a complete destruction of the character, but it's a unveiling of who and what you really are. So it unveils the principles and characteristics of consciousness, and those are quantum in characteristics. And so it's actually I use the term cosmic egg. It's the cosmic egg turning inside out. And so there you are, naked and vulnerable, and all that you've built up to ward off the cosmic and the quantum and the continuum of consciousness, it shatters and tears down all those things that we've used to help the character feel centered, grounded, aligned, and true. And so we go through this deep process of, and it's a bit of a process, to disentangle ourselves from all those unnecessary elements we've built up, like walls and towers and constructions to ward off and make our world nice and convenient and safe. And so the singularity is what's responsible for all of those items. It is conscious. It is consciousness itself. It's the continuum reasserting itself from the inside out. And so it's good to study the forces that are enacted as one starts to venture closer to a black hole and then move down into the singularity, because it's all about this journey of moving into shaman's death, dark night of the soul, the fugue and the crucible, to burn away all that we don't realize how much we are gripping to ward off who and what we really are. And they are actually unnecessary as we move into the vulnerability and the sensitivity. However, it takes a while for us to wean, like, I use the metaphor of little Ronnie riding his two-wheeler, learning to get his balance, and finally the day comes when he can take off the training wheels. Well, the quantum is doing the same thing. The singularity is responsible for that. It's the center of your consciousness, and it's being attracted to the larger consciousness at the center of the galaxy, which is also one that exists at the center of the universe, the center of this cosmos. And so it prepares us little by little by these effects that are like dark night of the soul, shaman's death, fugue, and crucible. And so as we approach the black hole, now we have to remember that science, astronomy, astrophysics has taught us that what we see out in the universe is only about 15% or less. Most of it is dark matter and dark energy. And so dark matter has an effect to it that is attraction. So it's gravitation and compaction. While as dark energy is repulsive. And if you think about it, when we went unconscious, all the fractals, all the fractures of the one self cataclysmically ran off at the moment it went unconscious, because everything was alien to everything else. So there was this great revulsion, right? And then as astronomy teaches us that speed of light is one measuring stick, but then there's a thing that's a force that's called inflation. And so inflation is actually every part, dark energy and dark matter, being repulsed and moving out. So if you can imagine, light is moving at a certain speed, but inflation is taking place faster than the speed of light. So inflation is where repulsion, dark energy, comes from. But that's all us. So dark matter and dark energy are us, and that's another component. And so we have to take those elements into consideration. Now, in the movement towards the singularity, and let me bring up singularity. Okay, so here's the image of the singularity. It's the point between the black hole and the white hole. So let's look at the black hole for a second. So everything down in the black hole side, and remember, when we're orienting in space, we have to have a relative point to orient. So what is the white hole and what is the black hole? Yeah, it depends on your orientation to what you're viewing as the singularity in the black hole and the event horizon and such. Anyway, inside of the black hole would be drawing waves and particles and mass into itself, and it starts spinning. So here is a factor that you're going to experience: spinning. Now, I talked about in the 26,000 year cycle of the yugas, we've been on the bottom side of the galaxy, and so when we started off 13,000 years ago, time started very, very slowly, but we're coming up on the other side of the disk. So our orbit is now to the point where time has sped up so much that it's like we're spinning and spinning and spinning. So the effect is like coming down the black hole. We're starting to spin, so we start to feel the spinning, and the spinning, leaves us in that state of no longer being able to hold on to external navigational points for our movement into the reality and our orientation to it. We have to take the cue of internal navigation to plot now where we are, because the reality, and we see it in the external world on the news all the time, everything is spinning so fast that time and experience seems to be heightening on a daily basis, on a moment by moment basis. So as we're experiencing moving faster and faster, as we're moving up the upper side of the galaxy, the galactic disk, we start moving and experiencing, as we get to the event horizon. This is the point where there's no return. So the event horizon is the point where we start experiencing even more forces upon our being. So remember, I was talking about all those different layers of the solid, liquid, gaseous, plasma, and so on. Here we go. So from the most solid level, consciousness creates subtle layers and stratifications in order to house the next layer of separation consciousness, all the way down to the most solid. So solid, liquid, gaseous, astral, plasma, etheric, voidness, and consciousness, these are all starting, the boundaries on them, like those two ocean boundaries coming together. They're in constant roiling motion. The spinning is taking place. We're coming down the event horizon, so that's also taking place. And so we start to experience greater amounts of pulling, so we seem to be extruding into the reality. So here's the image, like if we had a planet near the event horizon, the planet starts to feel the stretch and the gravitational pull towards the singularity. So it's starting to feel an extrusion, right? And so that extrusion, science or astrophysics calls this spaghettification. And if you were to continue in this process, this is where space and time starts to dilate, and you get literally, your senses become stretched, and you're experiencing the, in the vortex of the constant spinning motion, the heightening of frequency. All the frequencies are starting together, so everything seems like it's speeding up rapidly. So the stretching of trying to hold on to what was normal, what was ordinary, what was linear, is getting harder and harder. So it feels like you're being stretched to hold on to that reality, or that goal, or that picture of yourself. Everything seems to be in this extrusion, this stretching, this spaghettification, and that creates an experience. Here's another great graphic. So an individual will feel like they're being stretched all the way across all those different stratifications, from solid to voidness and consciousness itself. So it's being tested on all these different layers and levels. It's being stretched to its max, right? Well, there's other forces that you can imagine. A singularity is responsible for taking that which is entangled, wave and particle, take that which is entangled and return it to superposition. That's its job. We have that right at our core. So of course it's been, giving us sequences, moments, and periods of experiencing little by little this gravitational pull into the shaman's death, into the dark night of the soul, into the fugue and the crucible, to get us to look at all the issues where we're holding on to, especially belief systems about ourselves. Remember the value of yourself? This is being stretched. The self-appreciation, the self-love, the self-realization. All of these are being stretched in all of the windows and frames of all of the stories and experiences we've had in our reality. And so we're moving into a point where we can embrace all of that, because we're not the linear character, and we're not the linearification, our identification and linearity of who and what we are. We're something much more. We're a continuum. So we're not the solid thing that we've always thought we were, and we've given so much energy and attention to. So even our stories are not really true. They're ours, but they're not really true. And we have to take that fabric of concreteness out of it, which is the self-judgment. The self-judgment has to come out of that to see ourselves in a more clear fashion, to see ourselves in the truth. We need to see the asymmetrical and disproportionate reaction, because our stories are made from those experience, the window frames of how people reacted to us in our situations, where we voluntarily gave up our empowerment for what? To have the neediness, the powerlessness, the worthlessness, the self-worth being articulated from the external towards us, because we weren't grabbing it or acknowledging it or recognizing it or validating it within ourselves. And so the singularity is responsible for returning us, getting us to disentangle from the entanglements of all of our stories and all of the concrete belief systems and emotions that we've inculcated ourselves and calcified ourselves into. So as we approach the singularity, and we have these episodes of the dark night of the soul, the fugue and the crucible and so on, the shaman's death, then we get to experience also the heightening of the tensions, which are here. We'll experience the extrusion, that's the spaghettification, the being stretched to the limit. How many of us are being stretched to the limits of our capacity to, of the character, to the doer, to accomplish all of our list, our priority list, our have-to-do list. And until we finish the list, we're nothing if we don't accomplish all the things on our list. Right? Well, who are you when you get off the hamster wheel of duty, obligation, self-sacrifice? That's who you really are, and that's what the quantum and the singularity is trying to do, is get you used to you acknowledging yourself and making yourself okay as you get off the priority list, the hamster wheel of duty, obligation, self-sacrifice. So it's got to put you through an experience of extrusion, tension. That's when you take a bar and you try to bend it past its limit of holding, right? So how many of our situations are filled with extrusion, tension? Torsion is when you're twisting to try to fit into this group or that group or this acceptance parameter, or you're putting yourself through all these tensions and torsions and really twisting, so compromising yourself instead of accepting yourself for being beyond what the character is. And so extrusion, tension, torsion, compaction, that's when, I was talking about the dark matter, and dark matter has extreme gravitational and magnetic force that it tries to compact you to the point of imploding. So this affects us in our reality, like so much pressure is being put on us to the point where the character cannot possibly do anymore, but you're so afraid of imploding. What's going to happen if you implode? Who are you if you implode? If you implode, you find out, you accept implosion, then what happens is you find out who you are. You start to accept that you already are all things. You are the continuum. So you move out of the character, but the character wants to fulfill the black hole of filling all the compaction to implode, to the point of implosion. Doesn't want to implode. Wants to prove the character's worth by being perfect. And that's not perfect. That's the character in resistance, warding off the acceptance of the fullness of who and what it is. Then some of the more difficult areas, the repulsion. The repulsion of the alienness of everyone. We feel it most when we're under all of these different pressures and sensations. Remember, we're talking about moving towards that singularity. So under all these different pressures, one of the things we come across is the band of energy that experiences the repulsion, or you're repulsed and revulsed by the alienness, how are other people going to look at you? We are most concerned with unconscious retribution and unconscious unacceptance of others. How are others going to take it? Well, if you're fully in your power, it really doesn't, remember we were talking about at the beginning of this, starting to cross the quantum bridge, you've got to have so much self-acceptance, self-love, and self-realization. So that's self-validation So nobody else, the alienness, that's theirs. They have to face that. And yours, facing the band of energy that's unconscious, that's repulsive and revulsive. That's dark energy. Dark energy is unconscious energy. Consciousness sees the oneness in all beings and feels the oneness. That's why all of these things cannot just be done intellectually. You have to move your center, your singularity has to experience in the nakedness, in the complete void. No ground, no orientation. You don't need orient navigational points then in the void, because you already know who you are. Experientially, you've experienced being void and consciousness, so you know you're the whole thing. But if you're trapped in the character needs, those navigational points, those validation points from the external reality and in other people, other beings, especially in what you're striving for. So repulsion, revulsion, and finally inertia. We've talked about this experience being out here on the solar system and its traversing of the 26,000 year cycle. However, this is a metaphor of experientially moving back through our galactic center. So moving through the galactic center has us move through the singularity. And so at this time, we're feeling all those forces that we just described. And as we allow ourselves to step into experience in this vulnerable and conscious state and acclimate through the shaman's death, dark night of the soul, the fugue and the crucible, and however you want to describe it. As you're moving through those states and feeling all those characteristics on you, it's kind of like a test. The singularity it has us experience, getting us ready for detaching completely from the limitations and boundaries and confines of the character. So it's really about opening up that cosmic egg to nth degree. Now, as that happens, so experientially, moving through the singular, we all have to pass through this. So this 26,000 year cycle, and the cycle we're on now, is about metaphorically going through the singularity, the black hole at the center of the galaxy. Now, that's the test, the trial, and the preparation to see if we're really ready to move into the stillness, the peace, the quantum experience of who and what you are. As you do, it has you experience simultaneously through the superposition. You feel the expansiveness of your being and embracing not just the Milky Way, but also Andromeda, Orion, Sirius, Arcturus, Pleiades, all these different civilizations, galaxies, all being part of the rainbow bridge. And you can feel the interconnection and the merging of all these different fractals of the self coming back into the center, coming back into the wholeness. It's almost like being at the very center of the torus. You have all the different rainbow connections of all the other vectors in the local vicinity of the galaxy, the cosmos, and beyond. And as we explored in the previous video, you're the observer, so you're not really moving, but you're allowing the cohesive integration of all these different filaments connecting all the fractals of all the different races and beings that you are. So as I experience going through that singularity and experience that superposition, embracing the alignment of the rainbow bridge connecting all the different systems, galaxies, then in my quantum experience I had a being visited and announced it. So I never experienced this being before, and this being, she stands on one leg representing the uniting of all these threads, all of these different fractalizations and experiences of these different aspects of consciousness playing out in this diverse universe. She announced herself as Ekajati, which is blue Tara, and her beingness is often depicted with 24 arms and 12 heads representing all the different aspects coming back, uniting into the one. So I hope your experience helps you integrate all that you are and helps you feel the non-alienness, the unicity of all the fractals that you're connected to from the observer perspective, source, and the character, that you can feel united, grounded, complete, and whole in the continuum of consciousness as you steward all those parts returning back to you. And so we're going to do a meditation now, and I hope some of this made sense. All right, let's find our perfect meditation position, allowing yourself to find your most comfortable, optimal position, and begin your deep rhythmic breathing. Inviting yourself to move into center. Let go of all the information. Let's allow the meditation to settle us deep into our center. Let the music be an assistant in helping cleanse, purify, balance the energy bodies. we guide and invite our consciousness to settle in our center of source, a singularity in the heart. And as we do, we ground into our great heart, the core of our Mother Earth, inviting her assistance, her energy, consciousness, pervading all around us, assisting and balancing. All the energies into greater sense of vulnerability, sensitivity. As each breath takes us deeper in the journey inward, we expand naturally. From the inside out. Opening the senses, that aspect of our observer, as we invite all the fractals that our heart's fine filaments embrace, opening the infinite windows of the heart. The eye of the observer. Naturally opens and arises as we invite all the fractals of our being on all the many different stratas of consciousness, from the solid, liquid, gaseous, plasma, astral, etheric, voidness itself. All inclusive. Each breath then reinforcing the intimate, reverent connection and communion in our divine state of ultimate vulnerability. Vulnerability steers the quantum towards greater surrender. And in surrender, expansion naturally arises. Let that expansion envelop from the inside out, the entire core of the mother. All its many stratas, from the core to the surface, all its many beings. We are the mother. Filaments of connectivity extend from her heart to our heart. Enabling the support, the embrace, quantum acceptance. Exposing the true self. Source, observer, character, planet, all in resonance, in rhythm. Same divinity, the same communion, the same reverence. Expanding to include the stratosphere, solar system, sun, all of its planets. Truly our being never moves, but in the stillness and in the vulnerability reveals through the communion, the constant connection, emanating as one, pulsing through all. And as you stabilize, in the surrender and vulnerability, the nakedness of the inner connection, the invitation extends to embracing the galactic core, and spread slowly through the entire Milky Way. Stay centered, grounded, connected to your singularity, operating in and so much support, divinity, from the center of your source, enabling all the windows of the expanded observer and all its many windows, slowly opening, exposing more interconnectedness. A sense of superposition enables you to experience being all things, centered in all things, connected divinely. With every aspect of that Milky Way. And as you stabilize, you can sense your centeredness, like an eye above the galactic center, yet it's in your chest. Simultaneity. You in your meditation position, seated on the earth, yet seated in the galactic observation point. As your heart stabilizes, opening more vulnerability, the connection to Andromeda, our closest galaxy. Is easily embraced. Each filament of your sensitive, vulnerable heart and its infinite connections enable your ability to feel the superposition sitting over Milky Way and Andromeda, Sirius, Orion, Arcturus, Lyra, Vega, like chakra points in your greater being, connecting to the rainbow orchestration, the connecting bridge work. Between you and all the galaxies ripe for you to touch. Notice the simultaneity, observer, source, and your singularity. No matter where you place your consciousness in the infinite universe, the connection does not strain, but empowers your ability to sense your presence everywhere. Across the infinite void that houses all these galaxies, creating the cosmos. Yet you are fully centered, grounded in your recognition of your singularity, source, and observer. There is no end to the expanse of your observer. So location is choice. And in this state then, experiencing the expanse, yet the centeredness, the superposition and simultaneity. This groundedness in the meta realization of the self enables you to experience the forces of the singularity without disturbing your beingness. As we bring up the movement towards the singularity, the stretching, as you recognize your place in the observer, source, singularity. The quantum resolution of your equanimity enables you to stand facing that force and embrace it. With no dysfunction, no challenge, No splitting, fracturing, or dissociating. The stretching, tension, torsion, compaction, implosion, repulsion, revulsion, entropy. As you claim, validate, and embrace the quantum you, the ability to handle the frequencies, the energies, the forces without the drawbacks. The quantum you resolves the forces of the extrusion, stretching beyond limit, the tension, torsion, compaction, implosion, revulsion, repulsion, entropy. This is how you steward your consciousness then, as it faces the physics of forces. You embracing, not running, not fixing, just abiding, enables you to take those energies fully embraced, stewarding them into their quantum resolution. Singularity then is nothing to be feared. It is a function to assist in disentangling from all rigidity and linearity, all gripping, holding. Allow yourself now to explore. Let the music gently work to caress, enjoy. Allow any emotions that are entangled or mental contractions, allow them to be resolved in the quantum. Quantum is the greatest detangler of all entangled energy, thoughts, feelings, all stuck energy. Give everything, empty yourself. And as you release, the quantum replaces. All that you surrender to it from any deep compartments within you. Let the quantum flow through you, seeking out entangled energy, consciousness. And let the energy of the quantum further disentangle. And begin to bring your awareness and attention to that of your singularity, source, embracing your entire singularity. Your observer. You cannot be lost. If you have found your singularity, source, and observer, and begin the process of inviting yourself back to the here and now. Take all the time you need to ground yourself. Fully into you, the here and now, the present.